Hi, and welcome to Owner Operated. I'm your host, Jesse Sapphire. Today we have on a terrific guest. Aimee Woodall is the CEO and founder of the Black Sheep Agency, which is a cause-driven marketing, brand strategy, and design agency based in Houston, Texas. Aimee is a proud graduate of the University of Texas and founded her company in 2009. Since then, she has worked with clients like Michelle Obama to the Federal Reserve of Houston and even famous Houston rapper Trey the Truth. She's done this while her company has been accredited as a B Corp, all of which I'm excited to hear more about. This episode is brought to you in part by ABG Print, a commercial digital printing company in NYC, and yep, you guessed it, the Black Sheep Agency. After the interview, check out their very unique website at theblacksheepagency.com. Hi, Aimee, and welcome to our podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm excited to kick off the new year with you.
Yeah, this is great. Appreciate you joining. So I got to start off with, I feel like I just said some words that if someone asked me to define them, I'm not sure I would get it right. So the first one I want to start out with, I feel like the word agency is used all the time. What exactly is an agency?
That's a good question. And I don't think anybody's ever actually asked me that before. An agency is just a term. I guess you could also call us a firm, or you could call us an organization. It's just another word for a collection of people who are creatively trying to move clients forward. I don't know if there's much more of a definition to it than that. And now there's a lot of different kinds of agencies. There's creative agencies define themselves as PR firms, as advertising shops, as marketing consultancies. There's lots of different definitions once you get under the agency umbrella. And we define ourselves as brand strategy because we feel like that's the most encompassing term, but even that requires some explanation. And to us, that just means that we're working with a client wherever they are in their life, whether that's a new company, like a startup, or whether that's a company that has kind of outgrown their identity and needs to evolve, or whether that's a really established company that is trying to level up in some way and accelerate the impact that they're making. So it includes a lot of different things. You mentioned design in my intro, but really what we do is take a real big step back with the client and look at where they are strategically, where they're trying to get, and then we help them build strategy around communicating that to the public in a way that invites the public in and captures their attention and makes them want to follow that journey.
Got it. So if you kind of mentioned it within the broad world of agencies, there's many different niches. It seems like you've carved out a space for yourself, certainly in cause driven, certainly to some degree in Houston. Are all your clients based in Houston, or do you have global clients or national clients as well?
We do a little bit of both. We do a lot of work in Texas. We do a lot of work right in our backyard in Houston. But we have national clients and at times international clients. Some of the most notable being the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, the Obama administration. We worked on a campaign that we're still working on. It's transferred out of the Obama administration and to an organization called the Common App, but we do a lot of higher education work with them, and others sprinkled kind of across the country.
Awesome. And when we'll get into how you started and more about your agency in a bit, but on its surface, it seems like a tall ask, right? I'm a printer. When someone needs something printed, they look for a printer, right? Mm-hmm. How does someone know they need brand strategy? How do you even think about offering that to someone? How do they know to come to you for that? And how do you even begin that sale process of, no, go ahead and trust me. I'm going to represent your brand. It's not like, I can print signage and pamphlets, but right. It's a totally different mentality, I imagine. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So, one thing I should probably further define is that we are an agency that also has, beyond just defining ourselves as brand strategy, we have a very specific niche. We work in the impact space. This also requires further definition most of the time. But for us, it falls into three categories. We work with a lot of nonprofits. That's pretty
Got it.
straightforward. We work with a lot of government organizations who are trying to build better communities, build better regions, change the nation in some way. And then we work with for-profit companies who are focused on social impact and trying to do business while making the world a bit better. So they're balancing purpose with profit and trying to create some change through the way that they work. Because of this niche, one might think that it would be harder even to find us. First, you have to know what an agency is and know you need an agency. Then you have to understand how you fit into that ecosystem. But we've been really, really lucky. I don't know. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, so it's hard to even call it lucky. But being as specific as we are about the kind of people that we help and then doing really good work has led to this kind of perpetuating lead generating system, because a lot of the people that we work with care about impact, not just the impact they're making, but the impact other people are making. And they share ideas for how to accelerate their missions. And so we are on an endless cycle of referrals. And then also a lot of the organizations that we have worked with have boards of directors, and those leaders are inevitably involved in other things. And so those leaders, see how we change the trajectory of one organization, and then they want to bring us in with another organization they're working on. But that's really specific to us. And so, to speak to the industry at large a little bit, I would say most people don't usually know what they need. And that's our job. But what brings them in the door is usually something like, I want more attention on what we're doing, or I think I need a media relations firm because I want more press attention. I want us to be in the media more often. And that's not actually even something that we do. We work with great media relations partners that handle that side of things. But usually that's what brings someone to us. They know that they're doing something that other people should know about. And they finally hit a wall with trying, hoping that it'll just happen. And they come to us with some sliver of an understanding of what we do, and some sliver of an understanding of what they need. And then we have great conversations. We spend a lot of time in that new business process, really getting to know a client and to understand if we're the right person to help them accomplish what they're aiming to accomplish. And then, if we're capable of doing what they need done. And then also, like, are they the kind of client that we want to work with? Do they meet the criteria of really having genuine impact integrated into their business or their plans? And are they nice to work with? That's a big part of how we make decisions too.
Got it. And so I want to hear a little bit more about, so it sounds like part of your initial sales process is a lot of your clients come to you to solve problems that you don't even necessarily specialize in, but through chatting with them, you kind of land on what they really need that they didn't even know they needed in the first place. And that's what you do.
Absolutely. So if they come to us and say, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I need, we immediately start asking questions, because that's what they've identified to the best of their ability that they need. And usually there's something much deeper underneath that, like someone to just go down to the most basic, and maybe something that you see a lot in your business in printing. Somebody might come and say, I really need a new brochure, or I need an annual report. And that, just starting to ask questions there? Like, why do you need a brochure? What are you trying to accomplish? Who do you think is going to read that brochure? And, sometimes they come to us with a small request like that, and it turns into something so much bigger because we start asking those questions. And really, a brochure wouldn't do the job. A brochure would sit on a shelf, or a brochure might be something great to leave behind at those meetings, but what's actually going to get them in for the meetings? So, asking questions is always the place to start. Like, why is the first question? Why are you looking for that? And what is this about? What's the bigger goal? What's, like, let's dream big and then scale it down from there, instead of starting with this one very prescriptive thing, and trying to deliver exactly what you think that is.
And so did you always start off with this niche of cause driven companies and institutions, or did you define that as your agency progressed?
Well, I can say that that was somewhere deep inside of me all along, because that's why I left my old job. I grew up in the agency industry, and I finally just hit a wall, like many people do in the industry, where I didn't want to create marketing strategies for industrial plants anymore, or hawk bank services. No offense to the people that work in those jobs, they work very hard, and those things are necessary, but like, that wasn't fulfilling to me at the end of the day. And agency work is hard. You really grind, and there's no it's a long journey. And when you don't feel good about it at the end of the day, it's hard to not burn out. And I just
Mhm.
burned out. So I left there. I started Black Sheep. And from the name, you can automatically tell that I was rebelling against something. And it was about 6 months into establishing the business that we started working with this incredible nonprofit called Neighborhood Centers. They're now called Baker Ripley. So if anybody decides to look them up, they're the largest nonprofit in Texas, and they employ about 1,200 people, and they do so many amazing things that it's hard to summarize quickly. But
So sorry, I have to just stop you there for a second.
yeah,
So 6 month in, you started your own agency and you land, I believe you said a 1,200 or 12,000 employee nonprofit that's extraordinarily renowned. How do you do that?
well, passion, I think. So it started from I was out speaking. So at the beginning of my business, I burned the candle at from both ends and both sides, and I was out networking constantly, speaking constantly, and I spoke at this organization called Social Media Breakfast, and one of the team members from Neighborhood Centers was in the audience, and she said, "I think you need to talk to our CEO." And I got to
Wow.
know the CEO, had a meeting with her. One thing led to another, and we started with one sort of isolated creative campaign project. And that project led to a 9-year relationship with that organization. But more importantly, it actually shaped the direction of my entire business, because 6 months in, we were up very late at the office. I think I had maybe 4 employees, and at least one of them was an intern at that point. And we were energized, and it was midnight. It was very late. No one's ever excited to be at work that late, but we were so excited. We were so excited about getting this work, and we were so excited about the creative that we had built and the strategy that we had built, that we were presenting to the CEO the next day, and what it would do for that organization, who
Mm-hmm.
nobody really even knew about. It was like a huge organization, 1,200, I think 1,200 people at the time. Now they're probably more like 1,400 or more. But yeah, nobody knew about this amazing work that they were doing, because it was really complicated and it wasn't in the spotlight. It was like down in the trenches. And we were just so energized by what the intersection of our talent and ability to tell a story and get in front of people to get their attention would do for this organization. And I remember saying that night, literally, I remember the words coming out of my mouth, what if we could just do this kind of work all the time? And I knew from the second the words left my lips that we would be doing that kind of work all the time at some point. And after that, it's like the power of manifestation. Like if you say you're going to do something, I don't know, for most people, I feel like that increases, there's probably some sort of statistic out there, but I think it increases the probability that you actually will do it if you say it out loud. We actually have a campaign about that too. So anyway, one thing led to another, and it took us about 2 years from that point. So about 2.5 years into the establishment of Black Sheep, we became exclusively cause driven. We made a big announcement to hold ourselves accountable because we didn't want to, later be, nervous and choose money over purpose. So we said
Mhm.
it out loud and then we did it. So it's been a little over 11 years and we have not looked back. It's been the best decision we have ever made.
Oh, that's awesome. And have you, so how does that work in terms of, do you interview your clients in terms of vetting them to, do you ever say, listen, we appreciate the chance to look at this project, but unfortunately it just doesn't fit with what we're willing to service? How does that go?
Weekly, we do that. And what's great is that we stick to our values and we refer a lot of business to great other small businesses and agencies. And, we are fortunate enough to know who we are. And I think because we are so confident in who we are, we tell that story. And the right people most of the time show up at our door because they get it.
Mhm.
We've had people tell us that they cried looking at our website because they just knew they had found the people that would understand what they were trying to accomplish. It's like a visceral connection when we have the right client in front of us, and it's exciting. But a lot of times people will come to us and they might not be the right fit for a number of reasons. One, they might not fall into one of those 3 buckets that I described earlier, in which case we know great people who do this kind of work, but in different categories. And we just refer those clients, which then brings those agencies to kind of send people that fit better with us our way.
Mhm.
And then sometimes people aren't ready for this kind of work. We go full throttle, and at times it might be, well, if we developed the strategy and set you on the right course externally to achieve these goals, you might not be staffed properly internally to handle that kind of growth and acceleration.
Mhm.
Or sometimes people aren't ready for the investment. This is a common thing that we deal with because we have big hearts and love this kind of work. There can often be a misconception that we're charitable, and
Right.
we're a for-profit business, and we get so invested and we charge for that. We're an investment, and we're an investment that makes a lot of sense when you're ready to really dramatically level up or grow your business, because
And
it returns.
got it. And so to talk about the structure of your compensation, how does it work with a typical agency? Is it a retainer model? Is it a supplement on spend? Is what how do what's the structure like?
Well, I can't speak for typical agencies, but for us, there are a number of different ways that we work. I mean, one of the things we try to do is be flexible in the way that fees work. because we understand, as a business owner, I understand cash flow issues and, you know, want to be empathetic in that department. So we work in a few different ways. The first thing that we've kind of always done since the very beginning is price out a project. And a lot of that is based on a combination of time that we expect the project to take and value. We price the project out and then we structure it like a retainer. So a lot of our work is deep. There's an extended discovery process. There's research to be done. There's positioning to figure out. Then there's creative and strategy work to do. So sometimes those projects can take 4 to 6 months to come to completion. And so we have the ability to not just do a 50-50 split on deposit and payment, but we can structure it out. Okay, we anticipate that the work will take 6 months, so let's let you pay over the course of 6 months. So that's a pretty common way of doing things in our book, but often we're funded by endowments or grants and things like that. And sometimes the money needs to be spent on a certain timeline. And so we've catered to those things as well. And then a lot of our clients end up working on retainer as well, where we've really dug in, developed a strategy for them, and then we stay on board and work through implementation, or at least like kind of lift off, and then we transition it to their internal teams. Sometimes we even help them hire and structure their internal teams. And then we might, work for a 3 to 6 month period to help them get it off the ground in the best way possible, and to coach and train their teams if they have new teams or if their teams need that kind of support. And then sometimes we become their team. So in some cases, there's a one-person marketing director and we are the team. And in that case, it's just kind of a monthly retainer sort of thing.
Got it. Yeah, I love I think it's both confidence and possibly arrogance, but well deserved, in terms of the idea that someone would come to you and you'd say, well, I hope you're going to be able to hire enough people for all the demand we're about to generate.
Yeah, well, it's part of it is demand. And then part of it, so that's kind of referring back to the thing I said earlier, but then part of it also is, do you have the teams to actually do what the programs that we're setting up? So if we build a digital plan, do you have digital people who can implement it? And are they trained in the right way? And do they understand the vision and things like that? Yeah, but that's an absolute struggle. Something that we have to keep an eye on, because we don't want to build powerful plans and then let them sit on a shelf because the right people aren't in place to execute. So we try to have as many of those conversations as we can up front. And I mean, I'm just a really candid person, and I like to establish that level of transparency and openness with our clients from the beginning. Like, if we're getting into this, it's going to be like a marriage. How can we make sure that we believe in the same things and that we have the right expectations, and that we also have a grip on reality and what will need to be done and how that will get done? This is one unique, well, I don't know if it's unique, but one thing that I love just as an entrepreneur is we often work directly with the CEO and sitting next to the CEO and saying, let me be your sounding board, or let me help you. I'm a creative entrepreneur and you are a whatever category of entrepreneur working with us. Like, maybe my creativity and my team's skills can help you figure out some things about your operations too. So we color outside the lines a little bit. We don't just stay in the marketing lane.
Along with that, you're also a B Corp. What exactly is a B Corp?
Well, a B Corp is a category of business that is trying to hit certain social impact criteria in the way that they conduct business, and ultimately leave the world better than they found it, by being responsible through business, but also by looking for ways to create meaningful impact and change through the way that they're conducting business. And don't quote me on that, because B Corp probably has an official definition, but that's my way of summarizing it.
Hmm.
You go through a rigorous certification process, and then on a regular basis, you have to recertify so that you're held accountable to the standards that they've set forth. It's a third party called B Lab that runs it.
Hmm.
And it's another thing that is not recognized as a tax classification yet for business. But it is, for me, it was just added credibility, because there's a lot of people who say they're doing certain things. Impact, social impact it's broadened kind of from the idea of greenwashing. And how in the beginning, when there was this sort of environmental movement, everything became, we're green, we're doing this because we care about the environment. And there
Sure.
were oftentimes genuine efforts, and then sometimes not so genuine efforts. And greenwashing just became a thing. I feel like there's like impact washing. That's not a very cool term, but but
No, but I know what you mean. I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's basically where the marketing towards the social impact lacks authenticity.
yeah, and also impact is really difficult to measure
Mhm.
and prove, especially when you're working on very long-term trajectory changes. Like some of the campaigns we're working on right now are about changing the statistics around unwanted pregnancy in certain areas of Texas.
Mhm.
That's not something that happens in 6 months. That's something that happens over years of time, and it involves changing culture and stigma and resources and access, and there's a lot of things at play. And so sometimes you can say you're making an impact, but it's not readily provable,
And
verifiable.
so in light of that, how do you have discussions with your clients and about, and yourselves internally about whether you're doing a good job?
Well, we have those conversations daily. And from the beginning of every relationship, we talk about measurement. We talk about, what does success look like and how do we measure it? The goals are really enormous most of the time. And so, how do we break that into things that we might be able to track or see? For example, when we worked with the Obama administration and in some of that ongoing work, we were trying to change the number of kids that continue their education after high school, whether that's a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, trade school, but how many students are continuing their education. And that's really hard to measure for 1,000 different reasons. One is that there's like a 4-year timeline to start to like really be able to track
Sure.
things. So the campaign duration is part of the equation. The student roadmap is part of the equation, but then everything else in the world is part of the equation too. What's happening with the economy? What's happening with schools? What's happening with administration criteria? I mean, so it's like it's very hard to measure what your campaign is doing, because there are so many other factors at play. Like, are there better parent support programs to help their kids? Or they're better counselors? Or, so anyway, there's just a lot at play. And that's one of the reasons we became a B Corp, because we're looking for ways to validate progress everywhere we can, and just to authenticate what we're saying. And being a B Corp helps credibility in the way that it's not just us saying we're doing impact work, but we're validating that through a third party. And then, we look for ways every single day with every single client to further tell that story. And it's an ongoing journey.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it would be incredibly difficult. I mean, what are the types of metrics you find your clients are looking at, or the types of metrics that you suggest they look at? Because to your point, I completely understand if you're, trying to change, you know, outcomes within individuals that happen over long periods of time. There's so many factors, and certainly a long time to even just to get the data on the study, because you have to have people respond to prove efficacy and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
what are the kind of the near term metrics that you recommend your clients look at to help prove both their story and yours?
So a lot of times we'll do upfront research to create benchmarks. So how do we measure sentiment around something? A lot of times our campaigns start internally, trying to educate the current employees of the organization. So sometimes we'll do some internal benchmarking, and that's actually easier to continually measure because we have a lot of control around it.
Mm-hmm.
But really, at the beginning, we start with a lot of vanity metrics. So there are things like uh, engagement, online engagement, participation, with, if it's a campaign with like the hashtag, how many people are talking about this, how many people are expressing themselves through this, can we see that there's traction and people are paying attention to the message and care about it. But we obviously don't like those metrics because they don't really demonstrate impact. They just demonstrate talk value and participation. So how does that convert to deeper things? And that might be, like a layer underneath the vanity metric where we're getting them to sign up for something to continue that participation in a more meaningful way, whether that's like signing up to come to a clinic or a workshop, or signing up to get educational information about whatever it is that we're working with. It might be, sometimes early on, we're looking at things like volunteer signups or donations. The old school ways of measuring things and the kind of work that we do are like what resources are coming in because of this. And usually that's time in terms of volunteer hours, and then money. Fundraising is always the first thing on most clients' minds. But
Sure.
so those are some of the ways. And then beyond that, it gets specific to the campaign. Like with the COVID vaccine campaign, it might be like inbound inquiries for expert information, or it might ultimately be, once the campaign was released, how did the trajectory of vaccinations change? Which, again, is not going to be isolated to the impact that we're making, but it's going to include a lot of factors. So you kind of have to take some of it with a grain of salt.
Hey there, owner-operated listeners. Did you know you can order custom printed products on Amazon? We didn't either until COVID forced us to reinvent ourselves. That's right, the team at ABG Print got crafty and launched a printing store on Amazon. And guess what? It's kind of awesome. Want a custom calendar for 2021? How about floor graphics for your business to execute a safe reopening? Maybe custom printed envelopes or a slick retractable banner for a trade show. Flyers, postcards, wire-bound presentations. ABG Print can do all that and more. We've been around since 1992, always owner-operated, and always focusing on customer service to deliver your business great printed products quickly. Head on over to abgprint.com or check out our store on Amazon at amazon.com/abgprint. Use the promo code 10OWNEROP. That's 10OWNEROP to get 10% off any custom posters. Need something ASAP or have a confidential printing needs for a deal? We're here to help for all of your printing needs. Just give us a call at 212-398-1010. Okay, now back to the show.
Hey there, I want to take a minute to talk to you about MenuHost.io, a brand new website that offers dynamic QR menus for restaurants or any other venue in the hospitality space. Quickly design and implement safe menus with our library of templates and easy-to-use dashboard. Instantly change specials and pricing anytime without reprinting. Gather important data on customers with MenuHost tracking capability, which can retarget your customers with advertisements through Facebook or Google. So go to MenuHost.io now to register for free and set up your custom menu within minutes. You can even order laminated table cards directly from MenuHost. So if your restaurant, bar, cafe, salon, escape room, or anything else that uses a menu is reopening and wants to do so safely, check out MenuHost.io right now. The Black Sheep Agency is a brand strategy firm that activates people around things that matter, serving nonprofits, civic organizations, and for-profit clients with social impact at the center of their mission. Fiercely dedicated to driving change, Black Sheep strives to organize an army of co-conspirators who share a common vision and unite under one mission, building a future we can believe in. With clients ranging from the Obama administration to the CW Network, the San Francisco Federal Reserve to the City of Houston, their work is a driving force behind grassroots causes across the nation. For more information, visit theblacksheepagency.com or find them on Instagram or Twitter at Sheer Creativity. That's SHEAR Creativity, because sheep.
Are you guys doing some work around perception of the various vaccines and people's willingness to take it?
Not currently. We are working on actually two different vaccine campaigns in Texas, and they're more to do with education, pre-education, especially on one for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not necessarily, perceptions certainly play into it, but there's not necessarily a campaign that's like differentiating between pharmaceutical companies or anything like that. It's just more about like acceptance of the idea of vaccination and educating and making sure we debunk myths around the vaccine.
Let's talk a little bit about your founder story. So you were working in, I believe you said PR, you're working in an agency.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go from that work? You said you got burnt out, and then to hanging up your own shingle. Did you bring a client? Did you quit, Jerry Maguire style in a huff and walk out? What was it like, and how did it come to be?
Yeah, I'd never really thought about the Jerry Maguire analogy, but it does in my like rear view mirror, it does kind of feel like that. I worked in the industry for about 10 years, and most of that time was an 8-year period with a particular agency. And I got really frustrated toward the end with not having permission to try new things. And this was at the top of, I guess, 2009, and the digital revolution was here to stay, accelerating at a dramatic pace. And our agency wasn't evolving as fast as I felt like it should. And really, we were in the middle of a recession, and what had worked before wasn't working anymore. And I just felt like there was a lack of experimentation happening, and that became frustrating. So it caused some tension, and without digging too deep into that, I just decided that it was time to go. And for the first time in my life, I left without a plan, a next thing. And I was a little bit uncomfortable with that, but it was just what I had to do. So for a couple of days, I looked for another job, and literally a couple of days. And I felt like every role I read about sounded like the role and the company environment that I was running from. And so I took a little road trip with my mom to visit my grandmother in Corpus Christi. And upon that journey, I got a couple of calls from clients, and I had a couple of calls with friends, and one thing led to another. One client said, if you're not starting your own agency, you're crazy. And
wow,
I just didn't really ever want to start my own agency. But when he said it, I thought, he's probably right. It was just not something that I had. A lot of people dream of becoming an entrepreneur, and they know I'm going to be my own boss from, the time they're a kid. And I wasn't that person. I loved being creative. I loved the responsibility of nurturing the client once I had the client, and pushing the client and creating for the client. But I never really wanted to do all the back end things that a business requires. I didn't want to be responsible for payroll. I didn't want to be, wrapped up in bookkeeping. I didn't want HR responsibilities. I did not want to ever sell. That was probably the biggest thing. I just didn't ever want to have to, pound the pavement. And so I think at that point, I just, the need to have a place where I felt creative freedom outweighed those things that I didn't want to do. And when I got back from that road trip, that very short road trip, it was like 5 or 6 days, I drove straight to the office where you get your DBA, and I signed us up.
I love that imagery. Like, doing it, you did it in person.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't even remember what that office is called, but I Googled it from the car, and yeah, I remember it was, I think I remember in my head, I wrote a $16, wait for it, check. I wrote a actual physical, this was a government office. So
I'm surprised it didn't have to be certified.
I think they certified it. I mean, there were people there that had notary capabilities and stuff like that.
That's
anyway,
great.
It was, yeah. So I think it was like I paid $16 and got my DBA.
And did you, was it on that Corpus Christi road trip that you came up with the Black Sheep Agency?
Yeah. So there's another little part to this story where my best team member at my old agency was dismissed in a dramatic fashion after I quit. And so she and I talked a little bit on that road trip, and I said, I think I'm going to do this. Do you want to do it with me? Or do you have another plan? And I think we met for margaritas before I left for the road trip, and had a little discussion about it, and she ended up becoming my first team member. And we were on the phone sometime during that road trip, and we were kicking around. I pitched out some sort of a name idea, and then I jokingly said, or we could just call ourselves the Black Sheep, because that's what we felt like in this moment in our lives, where we had just like exited from this place where we didn't quite fit in. And as again, it's like, as soon as something comes out, you just kind of know. And it was that same feeling. I said Black Sheep, and I was like, oh man, that's it. That's who we are.
That's great. I knew I had to ask you about that because, Black Sheep to me refers to, can certainly refer to so many things, right? People often, will talk about like, my mother always jokes around. I'm a family of three brothers, and, she'll change her mind who the Black Sheep is at any given time. And, the other, I often, in thinking about your clients, right? Like they're kind of like the opposite of Black Sheep, right? In many ways, because they're actually cause driven, right? They're not, sometimes, at least in me, I've always associated like the Black Sheep with like, the one, certainly the one that was different. But,
right.
I guess it's also the one that stands out. So that's really
Yeah,
great.
I mean, I think of it in terms of like the name is provocative. Like being a black sheep, whatever kind you are, whether you're the stereotypical black sheep of the family, there's like controversy and provocativeness about that, right? And so
Mhm.
like, there's a lot of agencies and organizations that name their companies after themselves, like last names or initials or, things like that. And I feel like people can never remember those. I can't, if I had a nickel for the number of times that anyone said, I don't know, it's some set of initials or it's like a bunch of letters and I can't really quite remember what it is.
The
But
funny thing to me about that is, um, like growing up, I had a dentist that had just horrific teeth, and like there's so many doctors that smoke, and then I think about all these agencies, right, which are supposed to be excellent at branding, and then they have like their last names as the firm, which is like
right.
just horrifically bad branding. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like dentists with bad teeth. I never understood it.
Yeah, I really wanted from the beginning, I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it differently. We're not going to be like other agencies. We're not going to run our people into the ground the way other agencies do. We're not going to hire and fire based on accounts the way other agencies do. By the way, we've never ever let anyone go when we've lost a client, and we once lost a client that was more than 50% of our revenue. Never let
Wow.
anyone go in 11 years. We're not going to structure our teams the way other agencies structure their teams. Like we just wanted to do everything differently. And the name Black Sheep just symbolizes that. It's like, it's a little bit provocative, but it's also, we're going to go against the current and we are going to make our clients stand out in a crowded, cluttered sea of other people making an impact. Because even though they're good people and they could like technically be the opposite of a black sheep, they're
Hmm.
also in a field with a bunch of other sheep, and it's hard to get the attention and the dollars. I mean, all of these organizations are competing for money for their cause, and they've really got to stand out. So
All
plus,
right.
like if you tell
Uh,
somebody you're a black sheep at a party, like that sticks with people.
Yeah, no, I love it. All right, last question on the black sheep. I've always been fascinated by businesses that put "the" in front of their name.
Mm.
I remember I was actually talking about this with someone the other day. I don't know if you remember this when Facebook used to be the Facebook. When they first
Mm-hmm.
started out, they were the Facebook for a long time before they rebranded. Did you was that it was always the? Was there any debate about putting the? I mean, there's always so many companies that have the in front of their name. I'm always fascinated by like which way people go on that.
Well, it was mostly a identity trademarking issue. And that's probably why a lot of people have it. It's, there are other black sheeps. Like I'm sure you've been to a town or city somewhere in the world that has a black sheep pub. There's lots of them. Every time
Okay.
somebody goes to one, I get a picture of it in my text messages. But like there are black sheep in other industries and things like that. So if we could just be black sheep, which is kind of how we refer to ourselves in conversation most of the time, we probably would be. But the Black Sheep Agency just helped create more distinction from other organizations.
I like it. I think it sounds more dignified to me. Anyway, all right. So we talked about what your agency does and the types of clients you have. Um, but as you mentioned in your road trip to Corpus Christi, when all the things you weren't interested in, right?
Mm.
But all the things you weren't interested in, payroll, running a business, sales, you mentioned, accounting, looking at all the reports you have to do, that how much of that did you have to learn on the job? And tell me about your experience with all of that. Like, when did that become real for you?
Immediately. Uh, well, okay. So the the debt I owe to the agency that I worked at before is that for a long time I did have a lot of permission to own things, and also a lot of responsibility. I gained responsibility very quickly within that agency. So I was running my accounts holistically. There was no one senior helping me per se. I mean, there were some collaborators, but like there wasn't
Sure.
anybody, you know, overseeing that. So I had a really good idea of how to run. At that agency, we had it split. We had two teams, and I was running a team. So essentially, running a team there was like running an agency. So I knew how to do most of it, with the exception of payroll and sales, I guess. And well, you know, HR is certainly a craft, but I also have always been a person that studies people and cares deeply about people. And I think that's a lot of that, with the like, with the exception of the legal stuff that comes with HR, a lot of that helps get you a running start in the HR side of things. So let's see. I just jumped right into it. I think that sales has actually been the biggest surprise for me, because I thought of sales as, you know, like this really uncomfortable cold call, or like an awkward meeting where you have to be a certain kind of person to close the deal, you know, just like all the stereotypical imagery of sales that you see portrayed on television and things like that.
Sure.
And what I realized quickly, once I had a real business and I had an idea of what I wanted that business to be, and I also had me and Lindsay, who was my team member that I mentioned earlier. Once I knew what we were capable of, and we had sort of a positioning around that, it wasn't sales anymore. It was like pure passion and belief in our capabilities and in the way that we wanted to do things. And I just was so fired up talking about that it sold itself, more or less. And, you know, I think sometime earlier in the conversation, you asked me about whether or not we had clients that came with us. And we did. We had a couple of clients that ended up jumping on board right at the beginning that gave us some stability, which was really nice. And, mm-hmm. and room to start having conversations, because things didn't happen overnight. You know, we didn't have an enormous portfolio. We were a new company. But the sales part has actually become my favorite part of the job, because I just believe in our team so much. Now we have 11 years of proof in what we can do. And like, if I could do nothing else but just talk to people about it, I would be really thrilled. There's a lot that I'm still doing aside from that, but.
Sure. Well, and especially because it sounds like a lot of your sales is driven by, you know, both networking and the work you do for existing clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And, you know, the other stuff is still not my favorite. But now I have a director of operations who manages all of our HR and our culture, which is one of my greatest priorities in running this business every day is just building this culture. The day that we opened Black Sheep, I said, I want this to be the best place that anybody can ever imagine working. And I wake up every day trying to keep that our reality. And even though I think it's a great place to work now, I'm always looking at what can make it a better place to work. So I have that support. I have a managing director who helps with a lot of business development and talent assignment, and like how work is flowing through the agency. She keeps track of when we need new work and, you know, when we can fit things in and things like that. So I have a ton of support. I just hired a chief of staff who's also our head of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, you know, she started yesterday. So that's just the beginning of that. But I have new support in so many areas. So lots of new goals for the agency in terms of new offerings and growth this year. So we'll see where it all goes.
What is some advice you've received that's been helpful? What is the type of advice that you do, that you love to hear that's helped you in managing your business along the way?
Well, one of the things, I guess you could look at this as advice. Actually, this is probably the winner. I had a board president, one of our nonprofit accounts, the board president and I became friends. And he was one of those people who was just kind of frustratingly always right about things. And I gave him a call one day to let him know that one of our employees on his team was leaving. And we had a conversation about it. And at the end of the call, he said, "Have you ever read The Great Game of Business?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I'm going to send you the link to that book when we hang up the phone, and you should read it because I think it'll solve some of your problems." It's a book that was written 20 some odd years ago about open book management and financial transparency and literacy in business. And anyway, the book didn't look that good to me. It looked like one of those typical business books that you kind of read early in your career because you thought you should. And anyway, I knew that because he suggested I read it, I should read it. And so I did. And it resonated so much with me that I actually tore the book into 3 parts as I was reading it. So I read the first third, and then I literally ripped the spine of the book and gave the first third of the book to my director of strategy at the time. Then I got through the second third of the book and I ripped that part and I gave that to her. And then I had her give the first part to our managing director. And then I read the last part, and then we kind of rotated around to our operations team. And you might ask, why wouldn't you just order them a book? But I was writing so much in the margins that related to why and how this would affect our team that I wanted them to see my highlights and my notes. And anyway, so I have that book still to this day. I don't have it right by me, but it's all duct taped together again because it's sentimental.
Sure. I love that image.
Shortly after that, we had the entire team read it, and we rolled out what is called the Great Game of Business, which is more or less a way of managing your company with open books, where everyone in the company is involved in the finances of the company, and you kind of win and lose together. It has been, I mentioned earlier that the impact decision going in that direction as a company was the best decision I've ever made. This tied with that, or maybe right behind it, is the decision to implement the Great Game of Business, it was a little bit tricky because the way it works and kind of the book itself isn't really aligned with our culture. We have a very, modern, open, flexible, cool culture at Black Sheep. And this is very businessy. The book itself is about a factory in the Midwest. So when you're reading it, you kind of have struggled to see how it would apply to a business like ours, especially because the factory made widgets and, we only have services and time. So there was a little bit of a transition to figure out how to apply it to our business, but it has been so incredibly empowering. And just to give you one statistic about how powerful it's been, our profitability has increased by 30% in the 2 years that we've been doing it. And bonuses, because of the way it works, have increased by 300%.
Wow.
So we're as a company, we are doing so well because of this. And it has been so powerful because the way it works is it makes everybody so tied in to how, like, you know, how you hear all the time, like, you want your employees to think like an owner.
Mm-hmm.
And for 9 years, I thought my employees were thinking like owners, but they weren't, because they didn't have all the information they needed to think like owners. And this truly makes them think like owners at every step of the way. Even when they're making small decisions on a client account, they think about the big picture, and it just kind of changes everything. And then they are rewarded because of it, because we all know where we stand. We all set a goal together, and if we meet the goal, then we all, you know, take home the payout from that. So best advice, I guess, was to read that book.
Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic and its effect on your business and how it's changed things for you. So talk to me about, you know, you're running your business day to day, and March 15th or whatever date you want to pick hits. You know, what was going on for you guys, and what changed?
Well, that day for us was March 13th. I've only been to the office once since then. And you know, the good thing was, so we have a 17-person team at this point, and we do have a really nice office that people love to go to. We're kind of a close knit group, and we missed the office, but we decided on March 13th that we would close and work remotely. I think at the time we thought that was going to be like 2 or 3 weeks. And then it was going to be over. And of course, now it's turned into a very long journey. But the good news was we're very technology savvy. So we were set up for remote work already. We work with a lot of remote collaborators and remote clients. So we had Zoom in place, very comfortable and familiar with Zoom. We worked on Slack for communication, and we have a really robust project management system that, you know, catches every detail of every project and allows us to collaborate really well, even when we're not in the same place. So I would say we had a running start from a technology perspective, and we're able to just like keep, you know, not miss a beat. And and that's continued. I would say being apart has allowed us to see, I don't know if it's allowed us to see some gaps in things that we want to improve, or if those gaps have widened because we haven't been together, or if we've just evolved and new things have kind of risen to the surface. But
how has it impacted your employee development and training?
Well, that's exactly the gap that was in my mind when I was talking. We, you know, onboarding, we've had several employees on board in the pandemic, and that's been weird, you know, like thinking about things, bringing up things that we never realized we needed to think about. Like, for example, we just hired my chief of staff. We sent a desktop computer to her. She lives in North Carolina, actually. So I guess I should start by saying one thing it's opened up for us is we've decided our talent doesn't have to be in Houston anymore. So she's in North Carolina. We sent a computer to her, and, you know, used to, we would have the new employee walk in. There would be everything set up for them at their desk, welcome goodies and things like that, everything preloaded on their computer. And now, you know, we're shipping a computer direct from Apple, and, you know, it's like we need a file of everything they need to download themselves on their computer. So just little things like that you just never really had to think about before. The way that we do them is changing, I think. And then, you know, training, especially with new team members, I think there was a lot that relied on being in the office and seeing and hearing how things worked.
Mhm.
And now having team members working in isolated environments, it seems like there's a glaring gap in that area because that peripheral learning is not happening anymore. So we're working on a lot of more structured learning, more structured training, and also ways to bring our team together to keep us learning together and kind of feeding that curiosity and bonding us over like new ideas and new learnings. So that's a big
Got
one
it.
that we're focused on in 2021.
Do you think you guys will ever go back to a office work environment?
Yeah, so coincidentally, our lease was up in December and it was a 5-year lease. And so we evaluated whether or not we should keep it, but we decided ultimately, oh, also our building sold during the pandemic. So that was this added layer of fun. But we met the new owners and we decided to stay for a lot of reasons. One, there's so many unknowns right now that we didn't want to add another change to our lives. So we extended for a year. We're thinking about other alternatives following that, but we're going to feel it out for another year and see how it goes.
I have to imagine they cut you a pretty good break for a year. If
They did. It required a little bit of negotiation, but they did.
right.
Yeah, so we'll see. But we have 2 employees who have moved to be with family in the pandemic. And so now we have employees in Michigan, Montana, and North Carolina. The rest of us are in Houston. We actually had one team member who joined, who lived in Virginia, who moved to Houston at the beginning of the pandemic, who wants to be here. But yeah, it's we're keeping a real open mind. It's exciting because it opens up new talent resources to not just be recruiting people who live in or would want to move to Houston. But we also realize there are some sacrifices with that because I believe in remote working. It's been happening for a long time for a lot of progressive companies, but we also do work that can be very emotionally trying and can be a long haul. And I think there's a lot of benefit in the bonds that are formed between us as a team. And we do a lot of cultural things like retreats and things like that, where we take a step back and really look at what needs to happen next. And I think those things are so much better in person. We've had 2 virtual retreats this year and they were great. And they kind of pushed us to be inventive about how we would accomplish our goals through computer screens. But, we want some of that old fashioned together time back in the end.
Sure. I think the thing that I really noticed is the intangible 10 minutes after the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Is gone. And that can make things more efficient. Like if you're talking about like some nonsense about like, who won the latest sporting event, but what you lose out on is like the sparks of creativity that come right after the meeting and then the training and the training, right?
Yeah.
That comes with that.
Also like the 10 minutes after the meeting where you just say, okay, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this. Or did you get this vibe from this person? How did you read this situation? I mean, to do that now, like maybe you're just on your own in your room, thinking about that, or maybe you have to schedule a Zoom, or maybe it requires 15 different Slack messages to try and talk about it. It's like the convenience of like those moments that glue things together is really missing in this way of working.
You have been representing cause-driven firms for 11 years. I think it's fair to say cause-driven organizations have become more in vogue. It's certainly become more of an issue people are focused on across the board. Have you noticed, as someone that's been working for cause-driven organizations over the last 11 years, do you feel a shift, or has it been this way the whole time and now just people are noticing more?
Oh no. It's definitely increasing. I would say 11 years ago, when we announced, well, I guess 9 years ago, when we announced that we were exclusively going to work with cause-driven businesses, I had some of the most trusted advisors and close friends and, intelligent business people in my life ask if I was crazy and if I was going to turn business away and if there was going to be enough business to sustain us. And, at the time, I was sure. I mean, because we had kind of been running things behind the scenes, more or less, moving to this point, and the stability was there. But it was risky. Back then, it wasn't necessarily as prevalent as it is now. So most people were thinking of it mostly in terms of nonprofit work. How are you going to run an agency that just works with nonprofits? Do nonprofits even have any money? Things like that, and I knew it was right, but like we were at the front of a movement, and now, like we talked about greenwashing earlier, it's, everybody is trying to make an impact, and some people do it genuinely and some people don't. But the bottom line is we have millennials are the, largest force in the workforce. Gen Z is coming up, and both of those generations they're demanding in terms of the choices and the values that a company upholds. And they want to see more. What do you stand for? How are you getting there? What's the environmental impact? Like, why should I give my money, my attention, my time, my follow, whatever it is, to you? And that's why we see a lot of follower numbers declining. A lot of clients are unhappy with things like follower counts or the number of people who are liking a post or something like that, because these generations are more particular about what they choose to engage with, because they truly believe, and it is a part of their identity, so if I like this post, then people will see that I like this post, and that will be who they think I am. And there's a really deep system around that brands and businesses need to understand. But I think it's non-negotiable at this point. Like, you need to be able to tell what a company stands for in the way that they present themselves in every medium. And I don't think that's going away. Now, I think there are people who are doing that genuinely, people who are like, what do I stand for? Can I figure that out? Can I can I get to a place where I stand for something that's more meaningful, where I do something good through my work? And there's going to be a lot of hits and misses. And we've seen that a lot in the pandemic. We've seen that a lot, particularly in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you saw a lot of inauthentic boxes checked around, jumping on that trend and that moment. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of that. So people need to find really true intentions in that space. Don't just do it because you think you have to, and you need to find really good advisors around it too.
What advice would you give to, if you're a business to business plumbing distribution company, or a lumber company, or a printer, or a law firm, right? Are they supposed to be weighing in on social change issues on LinkedIn? I mean, I asked genuinely, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think at the same time, a lot of organizations have this pressure to figure out what they stand for and to not be quiet in an environment that is becoming more and more demanding for people to stand up and speak out. It's a tough thing to do. And honestly, like, we probably don't need, if everybody has an opinion about everything, that might also be a problem. So I think, it kind of depends on the business. My plumber often does have an opinion about things, and he tells me, but does everybody need to have a broad statement about huge global issues in their business environment? Not necessarily. So that kind of contradicts what I just said. I think you have to just frame it in the context of who are your customers, who are your employees, what are your platforms, and I think where consumer expectations get a bit clearer is if by not saying something, is there an obvious void, or are you maybe preventing progress that could be made?
Mm-hmm. That's a fair way to look at it.
And one thing I think is going to become important for businesses, whether or not they speak out on their social media platforms, is what kind of talent, what kind of humans do they want to work for their organization and move their organization forward. And I think as the generations grow into those positions and recruiting is a factor, there's just going to be more and more expectations for what's the culture like. And that's going to include things like, what are your values and what do you stand up for? Or what are your policies around certain social justice issues? How does everybody feel welcome and supported and like they're working for a company that is doing good work and meaningful in some way or another, whether it's, moving some big issue forward or just like creating a great place to work where they have fun or they, build meaningful products.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. I mean, not an easy question to answer, but I appreciate it. I feel like I'm still learning that one every day.
All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Owner Operated. If you want to help us grow the show, please leave a review on your favorite podcast app. If you think that you or someone you know would be a great guest for the show, contact us. We'll see you next week for another interesting conversation with an owner operator.